Was that my phone?
I think it might be.
It's like. I don't know what that was.
That's a good reminder. Please silence your phones. We are going live. We are live. Okay. Oops, wrong one. There we go. Okay, welcome everyone to We Made It, the testimony of queer Black writers with David Santos Donaldson and Robert Jones Jr. Give it up. My name is Greg Newton. I am the co-founder with my partner, Donnie Jokum, of the Bureau of General Services Queer Division, which is the space you find yourselves in right now. It's great to have you back here and to welcome you here, Robert, for the first time. So the Bureau is an all-volunteer organization. We have regular bookstore hours from Wednesday through Sundays, 1 to 7, although we're almost in July, and in July and August, we're closed on Sundays. So we can go to the beach too. So what else do I want to say? Oh, as an all-volunteer organization, we have a suggested donation of $10 to keep this boat afloat. So I'm going to pass this around. There's change in the bag if you want to use that. You can also make a donation on Venmo at BGSQB, which is letters all around. So I'll pass that around. And if money is tight and you'd like to spend money on a book, you should hold on to your money and spend it on a book. That's why we're here. Before I introduce our panelists, I'm going to read a land acknowledgement. So the Bureau acknowledges that our organization operates on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape. We encourage you to join the Bureau in signing up to make a monthly donation to the American Indian Community Houses Manhattan Fund. The Manhattan Fund, according to its website, is an invitation to all settlers and non-native people who wish to acknowledge the legacy of theft and genocide that comprise the history of New York City and the United States. And you can find out more at manhattanfund.org. So, we're happy to welcome Robert Jones Jr., formerly known as Son of Baldwin. He is the author of the New York Times bestselling novel, The Prophets, which won the 2022 Publishing Triangle Edmund White Award for Debut Fiction and was a finalist for the 2021 National Book Award for Fiction. His work has been featured in the New York Times, Essence, Variety, and the Paris Review, as well as in the critically acclaimed anthologies 400 Souls and the 1619 Project. You can subscribe for free to his newsletter, Witness, on Substack. David Santos Donaldson is the author of the novel Greenland, a finalist for the 2023 Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction and the 2023 Publishing Triangle Edmund White Award for Debut Fiction. He was raised in Nassau, Bahamas, and has lived in India, Spain, and the United States. Donaldson attended Wesleyan University and the drama division of the Juilliard School, and his plays have been commissioned by the Public Theater. His writing has appeared in various magazines, including Poets and Writers, Literary Hub, Electric Literature, The Rumpus, and the German literary magazine Geistes. Please give them a very warm welcome.
Thank you so much, Bureau, for having us. It's so great that we get to be here doing Pride. Really appreciate the invitation, and I'm so happy to work out. And also, I want to thank Robert Jones Jr. for joining me. Robert is someone I hold in extremely high esteem, and frankly, if it weren't for Robert, it's possible I may not even be sitting here, because the success of his book, The Prophets, really proves to the motherfucking people that we can sell books and that a Black queer voice could make money if told well, which Robert scored high on all these things. And so because of you, Robert, I want to thank you personally. Because of all you've done, I'm able to be here. So it means a lot to me.
was not expecting.
Really? Not to mention, just this week, yesterday, the New York Times, come on. The New York Times put out a list of the 25 most influential queer books since the war, and Robert Jones Jr.'s Prophets is there. So.
Wow. What kind of like surprised me about that was who else was on that list? Audre Lorde, James Baldwin, Essex Hemphill, people who, if they didn't write, I would not be writing. So like to be on that list with those names is just unbelievable. Like I still can't even believe it. It's unbelievable. How are you, Dave?
Oh, good. There's this podcast. I think, did you ever do a podcast with Reggie and Keely? Right.
It's called Books Are Popular
Books
Culture.
are Popular Culture. And one of the first questions they sometimes ask, just because, do you have any like trap gas? How you doing? So I have no trap gas today, which is unusual. So
I have a lot of trap gas.
oh god.
I have a lot of trap gas. I'm on a special diet. On my in 2019, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And as a result of that, I had to completely overhaul my diet. So like there's no red meat, there's no processed sugar, no grains, no legumes, like just a whole bunch of stuff. But the things that I can eat cause a lot of gas. So I'm eating a lot of vegetables and fruits and stuff like that. And I'm very gassy all the time.
Thanks. My fault, I asked, right?
Shout out to Reggie.
Okay, we're good. So we decided we would both read a few minutes from our works, just a very few minutes, and then get into some conversation.
Yes. And the coin was flipped, and I have to go first. In other words, David said, "You go first."
Yeah.
So, for people who haven't read The Prophets is the story of Samuel and Isaiah, two enslaved young men on a plantation in Mississippi in the 1830s who fall in love, and their love causes all kinds of commotion, chaos, and also inspiration on the plantation that they're living on. But the book also does this sort of echo through time, where these precursors to Samuel and Isaiah, Kosai and Alewa, in pre-colonial Africa, or what is called the before time, before Europeans came and waged war and enslaved many African peoples. There's a love story between Kosai and Alewa as well, under the gaze of Africans, in which queerness and transness and all of those sorts of things were not considered outside of nature or weird or strange until the introduction of Islam and Christianity via colonialism. So I'm going to be reading from one of the middle passage chapters, where Kosai is on the slave ship looking for Ilewa, who he cannot find. The chapter is called Bell and the Dragon. The ship bellowed before it dipped down and then back up again, and things rolled from one side to the other. Kosai listened to the cycle, something, maybe a cup, clinking, then rumbling to the opposite wall and clinking again. Perhaps in another place, at another time, the noise would soothe him, be some sort of nighttime song into which he could dream. And in the dreaming, he and Alewa led the hunt, capturing grand and succulent pheasants, which they cleaned and made into stew. Uncle Ketwa had taught him how to season, so every bit of meat was sucked from the bones and there wasn't a drop of stock left. They fed each other roasted banana, which Lewa liked smashed and mixed with mango and coconut water. They were too tired to clean up, So they left the mess for tomorrow and gazed at each other lazily, smiling like drunkards, until the darkness and the smell of impending rain had pushed them into each other's arms. "What shall we do with the feathers?" Ilewa asked. "Let us make you a crown." But it was daytime, and the light once again barged into the room, and the two skinless men stomped down the stairs and surveyed the captives. They walked all the way over to the far end, holding their noses, walking uncarefully, not paying attention to whom they climbed over or stepped on. One of them moved ahead into the far corner, where the light couldn't reach, where the rats played, where there was human silence in the air of rot. Body after body, hefted and carried out to be tossed aside like food gone sour. Not even the dignity of a pyre. He counted the bodies. 3, 8, 12, then number 17. And the words could not leave his lips, stuck in the crevices of his mouth and tying his tongue. He wanted to scream, but a lump lodged itself in his throat and the air could not flow. He coughed until the tears finally, from somewhere, somehow, ran, and the saliva too leaked, and his face pulled itself into foolishness. Elewa's body had managed to maintain its beauty. Aside from some bruises and his half-open eyes, he looked like he was enjoying a princely slumber. Had he been carried higher above their heads, it would have taken on the character of a celebration, reaching puberty, the first hunt, the calling of the ancestors, the crowning of a king. Kosai stretched out his arms as far as the chains would allow before the rusty metal dug into his wrists and droplets of blood hit the floor. It was almost intentional, the arc the spilling blood formed. The perfect circles themselves forming a larger circle, almost a head, almost a tail, almost infinity closing in on itself just right there at the bottom beneath all notice. They were jumbled when they came out, his words. Mixed in with his dribble, they were clear only to him. A curse upon you and all of your progeny. May you writhe in ever pain. May you never find satisfaction. May your children eat themselves alive. But it was too late. And the curse held no meaning because it was redundant. Kosai's hands fell to his sides. Disaster, he thought. A pure, plain disaster. Not only because of what he had already lost, but because of what he would have to lose. He had, after all, made Elewa's 7 aunts a promise. Thank you.
Robert, that was cool to hear you read it.
Thank you.
Take it in. Okay. I wanted to hear you read first, decide what I'm going to read. But
link up thematically.
Or maybe something completely different.
Okay.
So usually I read from the beginning of the book a little bit, but today I'm not going to do that. But just so you know a little bit, I'm not going to really give the full background. But Kip Starling is the narrator of the book, and he's a Black, queer, British Caribbean young man who's come to live in New York, the home of his idol, James Baldwin, to be a writer. And he's writing this novel about the real life love affair between E.M. Foster and his first and most important love affair, who was the Black Egyptian tram conductor. Now, Kip, the novel goes back and forth between Kip's own life as he's writing this novel. And I won't go into all of that. I could set up the whole thing, but we don't have time for that. But so it goes back and forth. So there's different registers in the novel. There's parts are poetic. Some of them is thinking about his life. And some of it's his actual relationship that's going on at the time that he's writing it. And then there's the part of the novel from Muhammad's point of view. But this, what I'm going to read now, needs no introduction, no other setup. It's just a little scene in the novel when Kip has an encounter with an NYPD officer. And I'm reading it because it's Pride Month and it's a kind of sexy gay part. Why not? Last day of Pride, let's go for it. In the East Village at about 3 o'clock on a Saturday morning, I was walking home from the Cock, probably the least imaginative and yet most succinct name for a raunchy gay bar ever. It was September and still hot and humid. The thick air clung to my skin, glomming onto every part of me. It seemed like a jilted lover. And that dark, clammy clinging accentuated an awareness of my body, its sexual sway. Crossing 6th Street and First Avenue, when out of nowhere, a cop stopped me and asked if I was aware if I was jaywalking. My mouth instantly dried up. I apologized in an embarrassing show of deference, knowing I had to swallow my pride and go into my Black man survival mode. Horrifying images of Emmett Till, Rodney King, and Amadou Diallo flashed before my eyes. This was way before Tamir Rice, Eric Gardner, Philandro Castile, Andy Lopez, Trayvon Martin, and so many more than I can even bear to go on naming. I saw his name badge. It said Savusis, Greek, I thought. Then Officer Vusis laughed. Hey, don't worry about it, he said, in what sounded like a parody of a New York City accent. I'm only fucking with you. I'm not even on duty. I'm Gus, by the way. He put a hand on my shoulder and gave it a manly squeeze. He asked if I minded if he walked with me. He was about my height, with thick, dark eyebrows and olive complexion. Dark stubble shaded his face. It took me several blocks to realize what was happening. This NYPD officer, Gus Savusis, was actually coming on to me. He came over to my place on Avenue A. We immediately started kissing, rapidly undressing, never questioning our mutual intention to hook up. But my heart stopped when he thumped his gun with its leather holster on the nightstand. The table's spindly legs shook as if in sync with my own. I insisted he prove the trigger was locked. He laughed, but I was dead serious. After having so quickly undressed and made out, it seemed we were now shy to make the next big move. We sat on my bed in our underwear, me in my white briefs, Gus in his red plaid boxers. I turned on some music from my clock radio, WBLS, Quiet Storm. Barry White softly crooned and growled. I went to the fridge and got us some beers, hoping to set the mood, loosen us up. But as we sucked on our bottles of Corona, Gus noticed I was still fidgeting. He asked if I wanted him to leave. No, I said, it's the gun. I kept imagining him yanking it out of the holster and shooting me when I was naked and vulnerable, or else somehow it would accidentally go off as we knocked into it while having sex, inadvertently killing one or both of us. I asked if he had seen Michael Moore's Bowling for Columbine. I explained it was a documentary in which Michael Moore deftly dissects American gun violence, linking it directly to racism, to white people's guilt and their fear of retribution from Blacks. Gus patiently listened with me with a bemused smile. Look, Kip, he finally said, I don't want to get into all this race stuff. I just want to have a nice time. How about that? He smiled devilishly. He had a deep dimple in one cheek. God, he was sexy. Sure, Gus, of course, I said. But as I leaned over to kiss him, his lips were fleshy, pouty, and parted, waiting for me. I heard myself say, but what do you think about what I said? About guns and racism. He looked down at his bare feet, his big hairy toes, and brushed them over the rough wooden slats of my bedroom floor. Look, I think you seem like a good guy, he said, and I think you believe in a world where violence shouldn't be necessary, but that's kind of naive. He went on to say, there's only one way to sustain life, and that's to kill. None of us would survive without killing something. Life requires sacrifice. Every single act in the universe has both good and evil results, Kip. And Gus was right. Every act does have both good and bad in it. So many paradoxes. I knew that my discomfort about Gus's blindness to racism would have to be sacrificed if our Eros was to arise. As he said, for one thing to live, another must die. And as I was kissing him, feeling a hot, ravenous appetite rising in me, Roberta Flack's sultry voice came over the airwaves of WBLS, singing, killing me softly, as if affirming some necessary sweet violence I was required to embrace.
One of the things that's brilliant about Greenland is in that section you just read, how you take a very serious subject and you find the levity at the same time, like, so that we as readers, we know this is serious, but you're kind of guiding us gently into this subject matter such that we can bear it and internalize it so that we can understand it. I think that's just brilliant. Not a lot of writers can do that. I can, but
Oh, I don't know about that.
I can't find the levity.
Yeah.
Well, the next book will be a lot more light in that sense.
Yeah.
David,
Yes, sir.
tell the people your origin. Like, what's like, did a robber shoot your parents in an alley and you became Batman?
Mm-hmm.
Did your mother mold you from clay and you became Wonder Woman? Like, what's your origin story?
Okay. And you can't find the levity? Well, when you said origin, I go back jokingly in my what do you call this at the beginning of the book? The dedication. I say to my mother, I'm not gonna read the whole thing, but talk about my origin. To my mother, who read Baldwin to me in the womb. So when my mother was pregnant with me, she was reading Another Country. And she said she would just read it to the baby and, as a way to, like, when I was kicking and making. So that's in me from.
Is that what made you gay?
Oh God, just give her something to chew on. Oh God, she will regret that. So I bet it's it. So speaking of, well, your son of Baldwin, right? I didn't ask another. You asked me a question, I was going to ask you back. But let's just stick with this. So I think about, I'm sure you probably know much more about Baldwin than I do, but I think about an interview when he was asked, what is it like to be a writer who has so many strikes against you? You're Black, you're homosexual, they said at the time. okay? You come from an impoverished background. Like, what is that like for you? And I thought to myself when I heard this, like, well, what would I do if someone asked me that kind of question? I probably just kind of did. Not exactly, right? And, I could be asked something similar, not exactly the same, but I could be asked, like, what is it like to be a writer who's Black and gay? And I'm very fortunate that I didn't grow up as impoverished as Baldwin, but I have another sort of strange, marginalized thing going on, is that I grew up in the Bahamas, but with an American mother, and my mother was complicated background, but she's African American, and her father's from Puerto Rico through Virgin Gorda. It's a complicated story, but the point is that I'm kind of what I consider myself to be a nowhereian. Like, there's no place I feel like I'm at home. So in the Bahamas, I was never fully accepted because I wasn't, 100% Bahamian because my mother was this other thing. When I came to the States, I wasn't American. I never really fit in. And so in that way, I felt sort of marginalized in many ways. And so if I were to answer this question, what is it like as a writer who's marginalized in all these ways? I can now say that I can answer that like James Baldwin. Do you remember what he said?
I thought I hit the jackpot.
I hit the jackpot, baby. Yes, exactly. He said, I hit the jackpot. And I think it's taken me many decades to appreciate how I hit the jackpot, because for many years it didn't feel like the jackpot. It felt very lonely. It felt like a lot of rejection. I was rejected and not accepted or understood anywhere I went. What I mean by this, I come to, let's say, white America. Well, of course, they're not ready to accept me and all my humanity, but I figure at least my Black brothers and sisters are going to accept me fully. But what? You're queer? You're gay? You're letting us down. You're betraying us. You're not being the man you should be. We have enough on us for us to be having to deal with you messing things up back. So I can't get accepted there. I go to my Black queer American brothers, and they're like, what's this? Well, I don't have it now, but what's this weird English accent? I sort of had that when I first came in, the English accent, and this British colonial stuff, and you were acting white, so you're not white, so we can't. So I couldn't even be accepted by my family because they were not happy with the gay stuff for a long time. It evolved. So there was really no place that I felt for a minute in the 20s, I'm taking too long, but in my 20s, I moved to New York. I thought I had I thought I was accepted by my Latino brothers and sisters, Caribbeans, Puerto Rican, Dominicans, and I was like, mi gente, okay, I can rock with you. You seem to be able to deal with me. You're not saying I'm not Black enough, but it just took me a while to realize the intense, deep, internalized racism and colorism in Puerto Rican and Dominican culture. It's intense. And, it's no wonder those Dominicans know how to straighten hair because they need it to survive. It's like their value of worth is all in getting that kind of curling line.
Have you seen Sammy Sosa?
No.
Oh my God.
Oh, yes, I have. What the hell is happening? I mean, Michael Jackson was bad enough.
There has to be some deep cognitive dissonance going on where Sammy Sosa was a handsome guy.
I know, right?
And now he looks like the Walking Dead, and he thinks he looks better. What is going on in your head if you think that looks better?
Yeah.
Like, gosh. But that's the pathology of white supremacy.
Yeah.
It makes you feel like anything is better than Black, even if I look dead. That's better than Black. You were talking about this feeling of loneliness and not finding a place or a home. Very similar. I grew up in a house that was on my mother's side, Nation of Islam. On my father's side, AME Zion and Southern Baptist. And there's no room for queerness in either of those worlds. But strangely, in Christian churches, the churches that are really popping are the ones where the queer people are in charge of the music and stuff.
Always the choir director, right?
You never say that. You never say it. Like it's weird in American communities. If you don't say that you're gay or trans, it's okay. You just do what you do in the dark. Just don't say it out loud, because then I have to confront it. Then you confirmed it for me, and it's in my world, and I can't push it away. So that's how it was coming up. Everybody knew I was gay. My father bought me a Wonder Woman comic book at 4. So he clearly knew what was down. He knew. I jumped double dutch with the girls. I was, yes. I loved all my mother's divas: Diana Ross, Stephanie Mills, Gladys Knight, Patti LaBelle. Like, so I used to take my mother like a t-shirt and tie around my head and dance to Stephanie Mills' music. All of that. So they knew, but the men in my family felt like it was their job to get that out of me. So there was a constant policing of my gender performance. And men don't laugh like that. Men don't cry. And men don't walk like that. And men don't put their hands like this. And, you know, this constant policing where I felt suffocated. And then I had the great misfortune of growing up in 70s and 80s Bensonhurst, because when I was born in Manhattan, raised in Brooklyn. I lived for the first 6 years of my life in Bushwick, in my grandparents' home. And then when my mother and I moved out after her and my father separated, we moved to these projects called Marlboro Projects, and it's dead center, like on the border of Gravesend and Bensonhurst. So to go to school, I had to cross into Bensonhurst. And I tell you that every day at 3 o'clock, we got chased home with bats, bottles, and chains, like every day.
Those days.
So you had to plot. I'm 6 years old, plotting how to get home safely. You know, what route to take to avoid these young Italians mostly, who were, you know, calling us the N-word. And I learned a lot of words like mooly, which is eggplant, moulignon, you know, like they call you eggplant and stuff like that. I learned all of these slurs. This is where my mother like kind of broke down. I came home one day, I was walking home one day, and this guy, he's in his front yard, and he goes, "Hey, Jigaboo." I have no idea what that means. So I wave back, 6 years old, "Hi." So then when I get home, I say to my mother, "Mom, what's a jigaboo?" And she just broke down in tears, because I didn't have to say anymore. She knew the scenario. So that was my racial awakening. I had no idea I was Black until like, or that Black was something different until that moment. I associated jigaboo with Black. People who are lighter with like blue eyes and blonde hair think I'm something lesser. I was at McDonald's one time at the playground. I was maybe 8 or 9 years old. Little girl comes over to me and she rubs my skin, and she said, "My mother said this is makeup." And then you go like, really, this is crazy. This is New York City in the 70s and 80s. I was 1 block away when they murdered Yusef Hawkins. So like, that's my upbringing. And then, so I'm running home from school to get home, and then everybody's like, "You faggot, you sissy," you know, all of that shit. So there was no safe place. So I was in the house all the time, reading. Reading was my safe space. It's the only place I found it. And that's where the writer comes out. It's because I had no choice but to read. And then because I could not live in the world that I wanted to live in, I had to create it through writing fiction. I started writing at like 6 years old.
Yeah, me too.
You were very young.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So if you guys don't know, David and I are debut authors of a certain age. So The Prophets was published. When The Prophets was published, I was turning 50. I'm now 52. David, you're not gonna believe how old David is.
He loves to out my age.
You are not gonna believe how old.
Do
Black
you know?
do not crack. Tell them
I
how
know
old
it's
you
an
are, David.
old-fashioned adage,
Don't-
but you're not supposed to ask a woman her age. I think that applies for gay men.
You should be proud, because you do not look even half that. So please tell the people.
Okay, let's say I'm in my 6th decade.
What?
60.
Gagging, right? Gagging. So well preserved. You have to tell us the secret. Is it shea butter, cocoa butter? What is it? Water? Because I hear people say drink a lot of water. What's the
Well,
secret?
you're not doing so
John,
bad yourself.
tell us what the secret
Yeah.
is.
Well, neither do you when you were quoting.
I know, right?
Emily, when I had with champagne cake, but I'm sure she was up in there. Stephanie Mills.
That's
growing
what
up.
I grew up with.
Yeah, yeah.
I was born in 71.
Yeah.
So yeah, 70s, that's my era. That's my favorite era of music and film
Yeah.
as well.
So yeah, literature for me too, where you're saying it was the savior, really.
Really, books save lives.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
which is why it bothers me that people like Governor Abbott and DeSantis are trying to like get rid of books, like trying to, make sure that trans kids, for example, can't see themselves represented and stuff like that. Because that what it does is, I think what the ultimate goal is they don't want a generation of critical thinkers. Because critical thinkers will then question, why are you doing this? Why are you treating people this way? They want you to just accept what they're doing. Patriotic. They want you to be utterly, blindly patriotic.
Yeah.
Such that they can get away with what they've been getting away with. They don't want you to have to think of it, be able to think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way the way the literature does that is that, for me at least, is that when you read and you read widely and you read from people from all over the world, you start to realize, hey, I feel like that. I think like that. This guy in Russia in the 1800s is writing about something that or this woman, Toni Morrison is writing about this, and Charles Dickens is writing about that, and I feel that. So it validates a sense of humanity that you're not getting validated from. You say, oh, so I am like everybody else. I have a sense of humanity, which I think, they don't want people to feel that.
They absolutely don't. Baldwin said, I used to think my pain was, I'm butchering it, but I used to think my pain was special until I started reading and realized that, I'm not special. That's what connects me to the rest of the entire world is the pain.
Yeah.
And they say, and this is a Harvard study, neuroscientists say that reading fiction engenders critical thinking and empathy.
And empathy, yeah.
And that's, notice all the book bans, these are all fiction. Most of it is fiction that they're banning because they don't want the empathy. They want to be able to turn brother against brother, sister against sister, sibling against sibling, that like keeping us scattered and confused and at each other's throats while they stick their hands in our pockets and make billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars, and it works. Divide and conquer has never failed, ever in the history of humanity. And even when we know that's what's happening, there's something about the human mind where we can't accept that someone's getting something more than us, that we can't, we don't like the perception that someone's getting something that we're not getting. And so if you say, as a oppressor, Black people, you should, straight, cisgender, heterosexual Black people, you should hate the gay and trans Black people because they're getting special rights, marriage, and all of these things. They're trying to take something from you that's uniquely your privilege. That's all you have to do. And people go bananas to ensure that you don't get the little bit that they got. And it never fails. And I've seen it happen over and over. In this country, the sign used to say, no Blacks, no Jews, no Irish, no Italian, no dogs. And then for each group that became white, because they were not considered white at first, then Toni Morrison says the America's the melting pot. then Black people are the pot. Because that's how you become white. You learn the word nigger and you say, those are the niggers and we are not that. And that makes us American, which is why I don't ever call myself African American, because this country does not recognize my humanity. It doesn't recognize my citizenship, surely. So I can't really consider myself American, even though, you know, my ancestors built this country essentially. You know? So.
Well, yeah, I hear you, Robert. It's you know, in general, I'm very uncomfortable with, you know, it's a little bit, I guess, controversial, but I'm really uncomfortable with many labels and identities. You know, we're here purposely embracing queer and Black identities, which I do. And at the same time, I know that even the idea of Blackness is a construct that was created by people who decided they needed to be white.
Right.
And the only reason they needed to be white was because they originally, you know this, you wrote all about this, but you know, the Africans who they enslaved were enslaved because they were not Christian, they were, you know, heathens. Right. And once they got on board, they said, well, maybe, you know, since that's what's keeping us slave, let's become Christians. And then the slave owners said, oh fuck, what are we gonna do now? Right? So let's make it the color of the skin. They can't change that. Right. That's gonna allow us to dehumanize them and treat them worse than we treat the animals, frankly. And so therefore I'm white and you're Black, and Black becomes all that. White becomes the symbol of power, right?
So why do we willingly call ourselves Black?
And then we take Black, and see, this is my problem with Black, you know, and it's a schizophrenic. No, actually, I'm sorry. Please, I'm a psychotherapist. I should know better than to say. Then there's this strange split. I was using it in the old sort of colloquial way, but there's a strange split where, like, yes, we want to embrace certain things about African history and Africanness and all the culture that we experience and the common stuff that we experience because of the oppression. We want to embrace that, but at the same time, it's problematic.
Yes.
To say I am Black is like saying I am a slave. You're not enslaved, you are enslaved. Right. You are not Black, you are labeled Black. So this is we're defining ourselves by someone else's definitions, and then always in opposition to the power structure. Yeah. So we call ourselves queer to define ourselves opposite or away from what's normal, what's considered normal. Yeah. I'm looking for ways to define myself that I create, that are not necessarily tied to how I was defined by someone else, or that I need. Do I need to be defined in those ways? Well, that's what, yeah, I'm sorry. I know that I don't want to be a white supremacist. I don't want to be a patriarch. I don't want to be a capitalist. I know that much. But what language do I use to express that? That is of my own definitions and empowers me rather than defines me by somebody else's imagination. Yeah. I don't know the answer to that. Right. Well, I think that's also where I was going with the fact that with Baldwin's thing about the jackpot, is that the jackpot is that it's a sort of, for me, the jackpot is a sort of a disguised gift in that you can't be defined by all these people, because you can't take those definitions to be, those labels to be you. And when no one affirms you, then you're forced to define yourself, like you're saying you want to do. And that's our journey, to define ourselves. And everyone has to do it eventually, unless you want to do, like, take the sort of Sisyphean task of like pleasing society or being what people want you to be, right? But otherwise, we all have to figure out who we are, how we define ourselves, right? Right. So I'm with you, and it's a journey. The only term or identity I'm comfortable with defining myself is witness. Amen. That's it. Yeah. Witness. Yeah. And I know that
somewhat comes out of a Christian tradition, but my greats, who I had the great fortune of knowing as a child,
Yeah. Wow.
Christianity meant something else to them because they were merging it with some prehistory type stuff that would be considered witchcraft or whatever
Mhm.
now.
Mhm.
So they were looking at it in such a holistic way. Christianity maybe was the cover for something much larger and much freer and much more loving.
Yeah,
And that's where the concept of witness that I'm talking about comes from.
I hear you. I'm with you. I sometimes get into things with my husband about this because his idea of like of Christianity, you know, is this idea that was put on him like this Catholic stuff, and I had much more your experience of that, which is a very different, but it's infused by other stuff, our history, our ancestry, and other stuff like that.
Yeah. Adrian, my husband Adrian and I, we've been together for 18 years, married, going on 4. We went to a church one time. Should I say the name of the church? No, let me not be messy. Adrian is like shaking his head if he's watching this. We went to church and this pastor was so on point, so intelligent in his rendering of the Bible and Christianity and things of that nature. And I was like, okay, I can rock with this. We can keep going here. And one day we went, and it almost seemed like he was doing it because it was a popular thing to do, because maybe he was going to get some donors' money if he did this. Just got homophobic, like out of nowhere. He had this, like, he was like making this analogy that made absolutely no sense. The look on his face was like he knew that it didn't make any sense. And he came to that conclusion, and I looked at Adrian and I said, let's go now. And Adrian was like, wait. I'm like, no, let's go now. And I walked out. I cannot tolerate it, you know. So I say that to say that I'm always looking for community and thinking that I'm finding it and being really disappointed. But really the only saving grace is to create your own community. And you have to vet the people that you are, you know, bringing into your community. They have to be, and I'm using these terms because I don't have better ones. They have to be pro-Black, they have to be pro-woman, they have to be pro-queer, they have to be pro-trans. Like I know,
Not just tolerant, pro.
Right, pro. Like that's a different, like Issa Rae said, I'm rooting for everybody Black, not good enough for me. I'm rooting for everybody pro-Black.
Right.
That's different.
Right.
Because it doesn't limit it to just Black people, and it excludes people like Clarence Thomas, because I'm not rooting for him. He's Black, but I'm not rooting for him at all. He hates himself. Did you see the front line on him? God, he's something else. And he's from where my father's people's from. I hope we're not related. I really hope we're not related. My father's from Savannah, Georgia.
Don't go on fighting your.
Could you imagine? Henry Louis Gates told me.
Second cousin.
Oh. Y'all might say suicide on television.
No, you're making up for it. But what you say about a witness, I think that says it all. To be, and that's the name of your newsletter, Witness. But I think besides all these other categories, I think one identity that I am also comfortable with is artist.
Oh yes. Which to me, witness encompasses.
Yes, I was going to say.
Yes.
And I think to be an artist, you have to be a witness.
Absolutely.
And you can't be too much identified with any camp. You have to be able to move and witness. So
you have to tell the truth.
Yeah. And no one wants to hear the truth.
Nobody. On either side, honestly.
Yeah.
Wants to hear the truth. How are we doing on time? Are we okay? We're good?
Yes.
I wanted to ask you about, well, a lot of things, but you, watch is coming on. You make it clear that you're very aware of ancestors and the presence and the importance of ancestors. Could you tell us a little bit about what that means to you and how you?
If I have a spiritual belief, it is probably one in which those who came before me, who sacrificed for me, who survived for me, so that I could be here being a writer, something that they could not do. It was against the law for my ancestors to read or write. That is the realest thing for me in terms of spirituality. Like, I can't get behind a giant Noba Daddy in the sky saying,
A giant what?
Noba Daddy. Have anybody ever heard that term, Noba Daddy? It's
I
like
never heard that.
nobody daddy, basically.
Oh,
A feminist came up with that term. Somebody who
Wow.
was like trying to break down the patriarchy. She came up with that term.
Alright.
Like, there's nobody. Like, that's kind of like my feelings, that it's a miracle that we're here. It's a miracle that we are conscious, sentient beings who interact with one another, that know we exist. That's just a miracle in this vast, now they say it's the multiverse. They think there are many universes, an
Exactly.
infinite number of universes, like comic books we're talking about years ago. See, you gotta read comic books. You gotta read comic books. But the ancestors mean so much to me because, see, I was lucky. I got to know I knew my great grandmother, I knew my grandmother, and I knew all of my great grandmother's sisters and brothers. So I would go down to Little Rock, South Carolina, which is a small hamlet in Dillon, South Carolina, and sit on the porch with my great aunt Annie, who, along with her husband, built their house with their own hands. They built it with their own hands on the land that her mother was enslaved on. I never knew this as a kid, but every time we went to go visit them, something felt so holy and loving about that place. And I would sit on the porch with her and snap peas and shuck corn and stuff like that. And just, she loved me so much. And she made the best banana poo. Like, my God, this woman could cook. I still can taste her macaroni and cheese. And then they're gone. My grandfather lived to 96. My grandmother died when I was 7 years old. And I had an experience when I was 7, where after my grandmother died, we went home after the funeral and I took a nap and I woke up and I saw her walk past the room. And when I ran out, she wasn't there, but she had on the same sky blue dress she had on in her coffin and all of that. So I took that from that moment. I said, okay, people who die in my family that love me continue to watch over me. And so I pay homage to that. And I believe that even if I can't prove it, because I had that experience and I feel a presence. And I know as a psychoanalyst, you might say that's something weird. That I'm not dealing with reality or what have you, but like I legit sometimes feel the presence of love around me.
Yeah.
That seems to be coming from an ancestral place.
Well, I'm quite the opposite. I agree with you. I feel the same way.
Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah. We're both crazy. No, I hear you. I feel very strongly. And sometimes, there's a question. Although I was at a reading that you did, I think it was with Clavis.
Clavis Natera, shout out to
Clavis. Where you were talking about the responsibility. Is there a sense of responsibility as a Black writer or as a Black queer writer? Do we have a sense of responsibility to represent certain things? And it's related to this because for me, the responsibility more than anything is to the ancestors. And I'm fully aware that not only as human beings, like it's a miracle that we're here, like you said, in the galaxy and that we survived, but then in our little relative way, as a Black person, that you survived all that has happened in the last years. It's a miracle that we're here.
A miracle.
The miracle that people had the fortitude and the spiritualness to survive such forces of dehumanization, and for us to be sitting here in the New York Times, is incredible. And we owe it to them. I feel a sense of that I owe it to them.
A deep sense of gratitude.
Yeah.
For everything they sacrificed and went through so that I could be here and you can be here writing.
Yeah.
It's insane. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you
Are
feel
you guys okay?
Yes.
We're talking a long time.
do you feel that there is ageism in publishing because we recognize writers based on age that are young writers, but pretty much ignore debut authors of a certain age? If you do feel that, in what ways do you think it has manifested for you?
Right. Well, I think, we're in a society of where ageism is real. It's not one where we necessarily look up. They often say that in a lot of Eastern part of the world, there's a tradition of looking up to the elders, but not so much here. Like, it's young and beautiful, and so of course it's in published.
See all your favorite songs.
Yeah, so of course it's, how could it not be? And there is, I wrote a article as in Poets and Writers about my experience of debuting over 50, and because I was still 50 when I got published. That's my own internalized ageism happening. So, what was I going to say? Oh, about the pain I went through as I was trying to get published for many years, and my great agent who's here was for the last 10 years, probably. It's been almost that long, trying to get me published with all kinds of things. So it wasn't like I was writing total obscurity. I had some people who knew that I was doing something, but getting published was really, really difficult. And I started really getting so depressed when I would see all these, when I realized I was turning 40, and I was like, oh, well, I'm too late. I'm never going to be on an under 40 list. Then I'm 50. I'm like, I'm not even going to be on the 50 list. It's like, and then all of a sudden I feel like, remember that, I don't know, remember that TV show, Strangers with Candy?
Yes.
Yeah, I feel all of a sudden like Candy. I feel like like a 60-year-old debutante. And everyone around me is like 20 and 30 and 40, and all these great writers who are meeting and who are debuting now. And I'm like, oh gosh, I'm at the debutante ball, kind of late, but I'm here. But I think there is some ageism, and I think I've actually myself been. I'll be totally honest. I worried. I was worried about that. I was like, even now, as you like say how old I am, I was worried that editors are gonna editors want someone hot too. They want a hot debut, but they also want like someone who's hot and young. That's like sexy, and that sells.
And what they should want is somebody who can write a good book like Green.
Thank you.
That's a good
Thank
story.
you.
My approach was like Molly Shen, and I'm 50. I was very Molly Shen.
Like Cheetah Rivera, right?
I could not have written this book at 25.
Right.
I wasn't ready. I hadn't had the life experience. I didn't read enough books. I did not study enough at 25. I could not have written that book. This book could
Or lived enough.
Or lived enough. I could only have written it at 50, and so I wear that with a badge of honor. Like I'm sort of like side-eyeing the industry that keeps doing these under lists, And I'm very proud of a lot of the young writers. As you
Yeah,
know,
like Mateo.
Mateo Escarpor, I selected as
Same.
535 for the National Book Foundation. He's a brilliant writer. And I think a lot of young writers are brilliant, but there are also a lot of writers who are. Aaron Fogle, Boys Come First. I've learned his book. Very, very, it's hilarious. Y'all have to read Boys Come First. It is something. He was also in the Lit 16. Shout out. But you're older than 35. Oh, you're another one that looks young. Okay. That's what we're doing in 2023. Okay.
I still gotta put up the grades.
But I think we ignore or overlook. Just think about how we do our divas past a certain age. Like, what is it with for anybody in this generation? Why don't y'all like people over 30? Like, what is that? Like, as soon as somebody turns 30, y'all just ignore them, except for maybe Beyonce. But y'all kind of starting to ignore Beyonce. They starting to ignore Beyonce though, because her album sales weren't like they were. And she's, she's on.
She's also doing more experimental stuff, which is great. But
they didn't really like Renaissance like they liked the previous stuff. But when I was coming up, somebody like Tina Turner could literally have a comeback and like sell millions of records and concert tours that sell out entire stadiums. They can't do that now. Like, people won't show up. They'll be like, "Who's this old person trying to dance?" or whatever. It's wild. Y'all should have saw Janet Jackson though. She's incredible. We saw her at Madison Square Garden. I took my mother for a Mother's Day gift. She was incredible. 57 years old, dancing like a maniac. She was amazing. And should you tell them what we're going to see tomorrow?
Robert convinced me. He didn't convince me. He influenced me. We're going to go see Diana Ross tomorrow.
The boss. She's up there.
So speak about, well, she's got to be how old?
Diana is almost 80.
Yeah.
70.
No, she's 79.
Oh, no, not quite. I think she's like older than 75. Detroit boy. But
No,
like,
trust. I looked on Wikipedia. She's 79.
Wikipedia makes mistakes though.
Oh, I said Diana Ross. I hope my mother's not watching
Oh,
this because she's gonna know.
Oh no!
She's gonna know.
Did you tell her about this?
No.
Okay, good. So she.
Well, my sister did.
Oh.
So now she knows where she's going. Okay.
Oh man.
Damn it.
Anyway.
We should ask them if they have
Yeah,
some questions for
questions.
us. Y'all better have some questions for us. Ask us. You don't have to ask us about our books. You can ask us anything about our lives, about all that stuff. I was saying to one of the owners of this this beautiful bookstore that I haven't been in the center since 1990. This is the first time I've been back since 1990. It is so different. When I used to come here back when I was like 19, 20, whatever, it was a mess, to be honest. It was like dark and things weren't together. It was a mess. And now it's like HGTV. Boom. This is like nice. This is a really nice space, actually. This is really nice.
So let them ask questions.
I was giving them time.
Yeah,
so
no, that was good. That was good. That was good. That was smart.
Yes.
You grew up as a kid in Brooklyn. Did you stay in Brooklyn? Did you stay in New York in your 20s and 30s? Growing up?
I left Brooklyn briefly. I was from 98 to 2002. I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina. I moved for work. I was working for Nations Bank, which became Bank of America. So I was in their HR department. I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is a beautiful city with lovely people. It was so strange as a New Yorker going to some place where everybody speaks to you on the street. Hello, people in driving cars, and then they honk their horn to wave at you. You're like, that person. And then I came back up here with that bad habit, and I was speaking to people on the street in New York. But you know what was the good thing about it? It was right after 9/11, so New Yorkers were nice for that brief period. They were scared. They were scared, and so they were being nice because they wanted God to be on their side.
The ones that stay.
Right, the ones that stayed, so they were being really nice. And New Yorkers were being nice. So I was like, oh, it's cool. So I came back with this, Southern hospitality, and now it's the Northern hospitality. And then that faded real quick. New Yorkers went back to their old selves, which is a shame. But yeah, born and raised in Brooklyn, well, born in Manhattan, raised in Brooklyn, and here for most of my life. I currently live in Brooklyn with my husband. Aaron is my neighbor.
So, yeah, my name is Michael. On Thursday, I interviewed Brian Broom at a conference I was at.
That's my home.
And everything, I'm like so geeked. And so now I'm here and I'm like, that's gonna explode. But it's memoir writer that reads very fiction, and as what it seems like fiction writers here, how is your story woven into what you write? And how do you use your experience? Like I was living for your reading, but also, how do you weave your life experience into, your writings? And how do you view your art as a memoir, even though it's not? I think those things.
Well, I think in general, I think it's hard not to weave yourself into your story.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you're not aware that you're doing it, you look back and you realize you have put yourself in there if you're doing the right thing. With this particular book, it's really tricky because I start out using my real self and my real situation. So it's a very meta novel in that way. But the character Kip is not me. But he has all the experiences that I have had, just in different configurations. But also all the other characters have experiences I've had, even the white characters. I put a lot of stuff that I went through during the AIDS, beginning of the AIDS epidemic, in the voice of the white husband, because that was my experience. So whatever I write, I'm gonna be in there. But this book, Greenland, plays with that a lot. It uses a lot of my real experiences and then I play with it. So it's not exactly memoir, it is fiction, but it's probably closer to anything I've written before that is closer to my real life. And I've always written things that had probably more closer to Robert's stuff that's like far from my actual daily reality, but emotionally true and experientially even still true in many ways. But this book is contemporary and more about things that actually happened in my life, are sort of woven in there. And it was tricky to do that. I really didn't. I was so happy and surprised that my agent went for this book, because actually the day that I actually emailed him, or I was about to call him, tell him, never mind, don't read it. Because my writers group I gave them the book and they were kind of like, it's okay, it needs some work. It's like, it's engaging, but and I was like, oh, I've made a mess, because this thing is like semi-autobiographical, has poetry, has some historical fiction, has some sort of essays, sections in it. It's a mess. This is, no one's gonna take this. And I literally was lying in my bed all day. I mean, I was so depressed. I said, I just wasted my time on this. And then so my agent, Tom, don't worry about it. He says, I love it. I'm gonna sell it. He says, I can sell this book almost as it is, but we're gonna work on it a little bit, but I could sell this book. And he was not kidding. Yay, Tom.
Shout out to Michael for giving body, serving
Oh,
body.
right.
Muscles.
48.
Okay, come on, 48. It's very similar. It's very similar. Although this is taking place in a time that I did not live in, each of these characters, even the slave masters, have a piece of me in them because it was the way I animated them. That was the way I gave them some human spark, some dimension, was to give them a piece of myself. So I thought of horrible things I've done in my life to give to this character, or some of the best, most loving things I did for somebody else in this character. And I was like, okay, so they all have a little piece of me. And the fact that they all have a little piece of me, I can treat them with some level of humanity, even when they do bad things, you know? So I wouldn't say it's autobiographical, but it definitely contains elements of my experiences, my personality, my emotions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Harold. This question is for Mr. Robert Jones Jr. I'm interested to know how long the prophets took. It's such a beautiful journey of like through time and through characters and through really emotional experiences, and then even ones that are really mundane, but you find this beautiful way to like color everything that's happening around you. You have to stop and freeze in that moment, and everything around you becomes these colors, and all. It's a really beautiful book. So I'm interested to know how long it took you from conception all the way to like the final edit.
14 years.
Cool. It feels like that.
The reason why I wanted to write The Prophets is because I was in undergrad, I was and I'm a late bloomer. I didn't seriously start college until I was 31 years old. And I went to Brooklyn College, and I was a creative writing major and an Africana studies minor. And truth be told, where I was getting my real education was in my minor. I was learning how to be a critical thinker, how to critique works, how to find pathologies that are happening in the works that I was reading and stuff like that through Africana studies. It was an amazing experience. But what I kept missing was queerness. So I would see it, the earliest that I could find it was in The Blacker the Berry by Wallace Thurman. That was written in like 1929, I think. And I kept saying, well, where were Black queer people before the Harlem Renaissance? Did we just pop out, you know, right then? So I spoke to a sociologist who told me, well, there were no Black queer people before then because the identity didn't exist. And I said, well, maybe the identity didn't exist, but okay, I knew I was queer. I didn't have the language, but I was 3 years old when I had crushes on boys. So I didn't have language, but that was what it was. So I was like, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So I said, let me try to find it somewhere. So I started reading all of these like narratives of the enslaved, like Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs. And there's this one scene, like 2 sentences, where she describes a slave master who chained a male slave to his bed and basically raped him every night. And I said, okay, so, right, rape and sexual assault, but what about love? And I could not find any references in the canon at the time. And so I said, Toni Morrison said, if you can't find the book you wish to write, you must read, you must write it. So I said, I'm gonna write this book. But I was scared because, you know, for Black people, antebellum slavery is a sacrosanct period of time. You don't talk about it, there's a lot of silence around it. And you certainly don't try to say that there were gay men during that period. So I said, okay, I'm gonna get a lot of backlash from Christians about this because first things first, I'm gonna have to critique Christianity, which is the source of homophobia. And then I'm gonna have to, you know, taint, quote unquote, this sacrosanct period. But I'm gonna write it. And I won't think about the last step, getting published and all that other stuff. I'm just gonna write. So it started out as a book called Sing Hannibal Bear Witness, where it was a fictionalized slave narrative where this character Hannibal relays to a historian his story, how he fell in love with this man and how they were run off this plantation and how they escaped and so on and so forth. But that story didn't give me enough room to talk about what I really wanted to talk about. I really wanted to attack the institution of homophobia from every angle. And so I eventually realized that it needed to be a book that had love at the center, and that love needed to be witnessed by many people. And eventually it became The Prophets, and my MFA program classmates hated it. They kept asking me, why do you have to keep writing about race? You're in danger of becoming a Black writer. I'm allowed, one classmate said to me, I'm allowed to say this to you because my mother was raped by a Black guy. And they just sat there and let them talk to me like this. And I was like, okay, yeah, that happened. And I talk about this all the time because I'm hearing from a lot of Black MFA students that they're having similar experiences where they feel like being Black in an MFA program is inherently anti-Black. And they really try to beat Blackness out of you in MFA programs. They want you to write like whatever great white writer is at the time.
And it's not only Blackness. I just talked to Edgar Gomez, you know who was the high-risk homosexual?
Oh, yes.
From Puerto Rico. He had the same experience.
Same experience. And his book is outrageously brilliant. I love it. It's so forward and honest and in your face, and I love it. And so I had to like kind of decontaminate myself from the MFA program and then continue writing, even though I thought no one would read this, no one would like it. But I kept writing until Kiese Lehman read it and gave it to his agent, PJ Mark, who is now my agent. And boom, one day it became published and I was shocked and scared. I'm still kind of shocked and scared, and I'm scared of the next book I'm working on too, which is actually, they say it's good when you're scared. So 14 years. So if you're a writer writing for a long time, keep writing. Just don't get discouraged because, I had to work. Like I had 3 part-time jobs in undergrad, 2 part-time jobs in grad school, worked full-time after I graduated, and would wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning every day just to write for an hour in The Prophets and then go back to bed at 4 and then get up at 6:30 to go to work. Because I owed it to my ancestors and I was not going to let them down. If they could endure what they endured so that I could write this book, how dare I say, oh, I'm too tired? Thank you for that question.
Hey, my name is Delano, and
I know.
yeah, I saw you in Brooklyn. What's funny about when I went to see you in Brooklyn is when I read your book, I really started thinking about ancestors and such. And right when I turned the corner to that event, I looked up. I was really tired and like, oh, I like this energy. I looked up and a Black woman was walking past with this shirt that said ancestors. And I was like, oh, this is just meant to be. Yep. I've heard you.
Ancestors.
And you've both been talking about things you had to overcome, like in publishing and ageism, MFA programs. These expectations, I've heard you talk in other interviews, expectations of what a Black novel should be. I also wonder about internal obstacles or hurdles, what you had to overcome. I know for me as a writer, a lot of it is shame and these ideas too that you don't tell these stories. We keep these kind of things secret, to talk about certain things and this feeling of letting down family by sharing these little things that we just talk amongst each other. I had to overcome that with therapy and all kinds of stuff. And so I wonder, did you have any with the writing process or personally, what were some hurdles that you had to or were able to overcome, if any?
Want me to go? You go.
Imposter syndrome. I'm not a good writer. Was constantly in my head. My inner opponent was constantly telling me how unworthy I was to write this book, how I didn't have the skill or the talent. And it was being reinforced by many people around me, such that when someone said something good, I couldn't believe it. I could only believe the bad things that were being said. And then also the fear of what will my grandfather say if I write about this? gay men during slavery? Would he feel like I'm betraying the family in some way or doing something untoward? But the main thing was the deep insecurity about my ability. Artists are notoriously insecure. I don't know if that's part and parcel with being an artist, but you're always doubting your abilities. You're always questioning your abilities. You never believe it, no matter how many accolades, how many awards, how many people tell you, you still think you're not good enough. That whatever the picture is in your head of what your art should be, you fail to achieve that every single time. And so you feel somewhat dejected. And the only reason why you keep going is because you can't not. Like, you will explode if you don't do your art, but then you also are dissatisfied with how your art turns out. So it's just this constant thing. That's why editors are so important to the process of writing, because you need someone so close, as close to the work as you are, who is also trying to make sure that it's the best thing you could possibly put out. And Sally Kim, my editor at Putnam, godsend, had to pull it out of my hands. I was editing down to the printing day. I was like, oh God, no, let me just change this one thing. And even when I'm reading it now, I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have did that. I shouldn't have did that. So that's just part of being an artist. Like, I don't think you ever escape that. So those are the challenges for me.
Yeah. You know, those, I hear you. Yeah, I'm similar. It's although I have to say, like, one thing that that's good about getting older, that you sort of learn, and I've learned to protect my process at by any means necessary. And it took me a very long time to learn that. And I'm extremely, like Robert said, sensitive and fragile in the process. So I have so many novels that I've started, and I've written a couple chapters, and I've maybe given them to some people to look at, or I've mentioned even to my lovely husband, oh, I'm writing about this, and you go, oh, that's interesting, and that's it. Forget it. That's interesting. I was like, oh my God, that's a stupid idea. It's horrible. You know, anything less than it's brilliant. I'm done. So I don't let my husband or anyone anymore look at anything I'm writing, and I create a little, you know, delusional bubble that I'm happy to go in, and it's kind of my religious sanctuary. So I feel lucky, because I know some people find writing torturous. For me, it's my safe space. It's where I go and I can do whatever I want, and I'm able somehow to put out those critics. But the minute that I imagine or I have some feedback from the outside world, I'm done. I'm like, it's terrible, it's horrible. Like I told you, I was going to call my agent, told me, don't read this, it's horrible, you know. And so the doubt never goes away, but I think I've gotten better at protecting my process and honoring my process. And it's, you know, it's kind of like, for me, getting a novel started is like trying to start a fire with two little sticks. And I have so many little times I've tried to start things and the fire hasn't taken, and it's like, you know, it's hard to start a fire with sticks. But when I do it and there's a spark, then I'm like, okay, I gotta protect this flame and blow on this flame and don't let anyone near this and keep it alive. And if I can do that, then I'm okay. I can only do that if I block out everybody. Yes.
I have a quick question for you, David. You lived in England for a while, right?
Very little while. When I was young, my dad studied at what's that school called? No. Anyway, yes.
The protagonist of your novel also lived in England, I guess, for longer than that.
Longer than that,
And
yeah.
I'm just wondering what the view of England versus America and the character, and also how did that inform your writing?
Well, one weird reason I placed the character more in England than I actually lived. I lived for a short time in England, in London, is that I also lived under British colonialism my entire life. I was old enough that when I was young, we were still a British colony. All my teachers, every single one of them, were white and British. So I was indoctrinated very heavily with the Britishness. And it's, you know, it's a very different, it's a, what was your question, Tom?
I guess why I wanted to ask how British white imperialism compares to American white.
Oh, right, yeah, wow.
I didn't ask exactly.
No, I got you. It's good when I can get my agent who's always editing me to be more concise. British are more polite and more reserved. I think it's a very complicated question you ask, because I've ingested so much of that stuff that it is in me too a little bit, you know. And I was like my character. I was raised in what I call like a Victorian ether. My parents were very much of this, especially my father, who grew up in the Bahamas, and so it's hard to, you know. There's some affection. There's a weird sort of affection for some of it too. But I realized that it's really problematic. You know, it's the worst.
My mother texted me.
Oh,
She said Diana Ross and put hearts.
see you tomorrow. Yeah. But there is a different flavor, and I don't know how to answer that question really so much, is other than to say that it's easy for me when I come, despite the fact that my mother is American, and I did spend time summers with some of my uncles in the States. I grew up very sort of identified with the English way, and so it's easier for me to reject the American racism and call it out. It gets a little bit more complicated for me to do it in England. And I have a friend, actually Seth here, who has a very different experience, you know, growing up in England, being, you know, if you're anything close to a quote unquote Paki, that's the blacks of England, you know, and they have a very different experience there. So it's complicated. It's a good question, Tom. It must be.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you all.
Both so much. There are books for sale. There's a table here where both of our authors will be signing. So do it. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for everyone who joined online.